Distinguished guests, good afternoon. I want to welcome you all to the 17th Jeju Forum. Now we will start our next session, titled The Policy Development for Governance to Support the Elderly with Disabilities Beyond the Border Between Disabled and Non-Disabled. For the smooth running of the event, please mute your cell phones. This session will be simultaneously held in Korean, English, and Korean Sign Language. Please use the receivers on your chair. Channel 5 is for Korean, Channel 6 is for English. Sign language interpretation will be displayed on your screen. Now, let us invite our moderator, Director Kang Seok-bong at Jeju Special Self-Governing Province. Director Kang Seok-bong has served as an adjunct professor in the Department of Social Welfare at Jeju Halla University, the head of the Jeju Special Self-Governing Province Support Center for the Developmentally Disabled, and the director of the Tamna Welfare Center for the Disabled. He's an expert in the welfare of people with disabilities, and director is now the director of welfare for the disabled in Jeju Special Self-Governing Province. Director Kang, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. Very nice to meet you. So today we're here to talk about the elderly with disabilities, and today we are holding our global national seminar here. So we have a presenter from Japan, and we will talk about the Korean status, and we will try to have a little bit of solutions. We will talk about that. So we will have a meaningful time. So let me now introduce our panelists, and before that, I want to thank everyone here, online and offline. So actually in OECD, Korea, the speed of aging trend is very high, almost top of all countries. And Jeju province, as of end of the May, we have 18,336 people as disabled people. And as of May, again, newly registered people with disabilities is 54.7%. So these are elderly people with disabilities, more than 65 years old. So during this session, we will be able to talk about the elderly with disabilities and how to provide support for them. And after that, we will talk about the policies towards the elderly people with disabilities, and this is mainly what we will talking about. Today we have a dedicated presenter from Japan. I believe we're connected right now. And first presenter, Professor Kim Jae-gun at Jeju University. Actually, he obtained his PhD in welfare for the disabled from Rikyo University in Japan. He also worked as an assistant professor at Waseda University, Department of Human Welfare for 3 years, and professor is currently at the Jeju University. We really wished we could meet him in person, but unfortunately, because of COVID-19, he is with us online. He will talk about the Japanese policy for the disabled. And actually, Professor Kim studied in Korea, and he has stayed in Japan for quite some time, and actually have seen policies for the elderly with disabled. Professor Kim, can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Nice to see you again. You can go on. We are going to give you 20 minutes. You may start now. Thank you. Can you see my screen? I would like to start once I'm confirmed that you can see my screen. As introduced, I work at Jeju University. My name is Kim Jongmi. I came to Japan in 2000, and after working with people with disabilities, I carried out my studies. And today, it is my honor to start my presentation as a keynote speaker under the topic of securing measures to establish the supporting governance for disabled elderly, going beyond the border of disabled and non-disability. Today, I would like to talk about status of disabled elderly in Japan, and second, legal response to the principle to prioritize the application of long-term care. Regarding that, my third topic will talk about establishment of a mutual service for the disabled to seamlessly use long-term care service. Last but not least, I will talk about establishment of benefits, including new long-term care insurance and high price to reduce burdens for insurance users. Before I begin, I want to talk about differences between the Korean and Japanese welfare policies for people with disabilities. They're slightly different. To talk about it, I need a whole day to discuss with you. And to do so, you need a holistic approach to review every aspect of the society. However, I have to summarize that before I start. We have different classifications of people with a disability depending on the mental, physical, and intellectual disability. However, in Japan, they classify these three as the main classification of the people with a disability. Developmental disability is under the mental disability. I will explain further about each and every capability. So I will focus on and based on the Japanese classification. I just wanted to make it clear. According to Korean classification, there is a new one to recognize faces. And we also have a different classification under consideration. So it depends on how government of Japan and Korea decide. So I just want to start with my comments that there are some different classifications of how to divide the people with a disability. Let me start my presentation now. Next slide. This is the status of a disability elderly in Japan. Before I start, I need to explain the political background. As of 2016, there has been some change. As you can see the graph, there are gradual increasing numbers among the physical disabled people. There are about 70,000 people, and altogether, there are about 4.3 million. If you look at the green part, there are about 960,000 and the blue is about 120,000. So total, it's about 1.8 million people under the category of a physical disability. The second graph talks about intellectual disability. There are about 3.6 million patients, and among them there are 300,000 hospitalized. So total is little less than 4 million. So compared to the entire population, there are about 7.4 people who have disabilities in Japan. Now I want to focus more on the disabled elderly. Over 65 years, there are about over 3 million, and the rate is about 74% regarding physical disability. Combining all physical, intellectual, mental, physical disability is the highest rate. The aging rate is about 15%. For mental issues, about 440,000. Compared to the figures about 10 years ago, aging for the intellectual disability people have the highest increasing rate. Next, by social class and by age, we classify people with a disability. As I mentioned, it's a similar trend. This is also classified by the physical, intellectual, and mental disability. Physical is on the left. You can see the gradual increase in the green graph bars. And there is a great surge. In the mental part, dark yellow indicates people with 65 years old. And compared to people over 75 years old, you can see the aging for the disabled elderly is gradually getting severe. Next slide, please. You can see the usage rate of the services for the elderly and disabled aged. Sorry for the Chinese characters. We can see the various services like a care by visit, support for patients' activities, long-term care for post-treatment cares, and all. I know we have a difference of the terminology between the Korea and Japan. I believe most of them have something in common. It's based on the data by April 2021. The most used services is the care by visits to patients with the severe disabilities, followed by services for the blind. It's about 17.1%. And welfare type, you can see the fourth one from the bottom, support for job-seeking activity B. That is also an interesting service that people use. And for people over 65 years old, there are different types of services used. The highest rate is from companion services. Accompanied long-term care is about 67.1%. And you can see the 26.3% found from the care by visits to patients with the severe diseases. Now I want to talk about legal responses to the principle to prioritize the application of long-term care. Under the principles of prior applications of a long-term care service, one of the social principle of security, citizens should use the long-term care. After 15 years old, they are forced to reduce the services. So to solve the problem, in 2007, there has been an amendment regarding the relations, etc., between benefits to support independent living and the application of a long-term care service based on the Comprehensive Welfare Act. The problem here is that the local government didn't really follow the rule. So in 2014, there was another directors meeting hosted by personnel in health and welfare for people with a disability. Here, they realized that the disabled should be able to receive services based on the Comprehensive Welfare Act. Through this opportunity, people over 65 years old now have a legal ground to use such services. But this is only the legal framework.
예를 들어서 2015년에
In 2015, there has been a survey over 65 years old. Sometimes they do not use or do not apply for long-term care services, even though they become 65. And sometimes local governments suspended providing welfare services benefits for the disabled. And the rate of the respondents were 21%. This suggests that it is necessary to force local governments to provide the long-term care services for the people for the elderly with a disability, whether they apply for it or not. Because sometimes they feel a burden of a cost. Some services are available based on the Comprehensive Support for People with a Disability Act. And even after they become 65, they have no cost burden to the service beneficiaries. So in 2013, there's a person whose name is Asada. That person didn't apply for the long-term care services, so the administrative organization suspended long-term care services for people with the severe diseases and there was a lawsuit filed and submitted to the district court. And 5 years later, there was a ruling from the High Court. After that, a lot of people with a disability started to feel free from the burden of a cost. And the human rights lawyers started to make this as a public issue. There has been a nationwide network with the lawyers and people with disabilities who are concerned about long-term care. Either they hosted a symposiums or published a guideline for legal knowledge regarding long-term care. Or they did some nationwide group tour to enhance the awareness of the application of a long-term care for the disabled elderly. So through these opportunities, this disabled elderly didn't have to file a lawsuit against the local governments. And if their local governments do not provide such services, the disabled elderly can still use such nationwide network to get some support, and it will bring down a lot of burden of filing a lawsuit. And there are many cases that the people achieve their rights to enjoy the long-term care services. So it has been very effective. Next one is a mutual service for the disabled to seamlessly use long-term care services. To strengthen the integrated community care program, there has been the Act modification effect as of April 1st, 2018. So what is mutual type service? When there is an initiation of the long-term care, you can simplify that services through mutual type services. So here, mutual type means that there are some common ground between different types of welfare services. So after simplifying, beneficiaries can enjoy the programs in more effective ways. But sometimes this mutual type service doesn't work. It's because people do not know about the mutual type services well, which means they don't know what they need to prepare. And for local governments, they don't know what local issues have been resolved by implementing mutual type services. So I will say that this hasn't been working smoothly yet. Last but not least, in order to secure the benefits, we have to create the benefits including the high-priced welfare services for the disabled. This helps ease burdens of service users simply when they reach the age 65. So once you use this service, the burden is lowered to 10%. It's basically free of charge. There's some eligibility. First, those who use the welfare services for the disabled, which are equivalent to the home care services for 5 years before they become the age 65. Also, disability classification has been fading away. However, at the moment, those with grade 2 or more for disability support are only eligible for this new long-term care service. Also, those who haven't received the insurance benefits by the Home Care Act until the age 65 are only eligible for this new long-term care service. That wraps up my presentations, focusing on the Japanese long-term service care. Hopefully, I deliver the status of Japan to provide some insightful information for you and for the further discussion. It is being developed and updated, but still there's a long way to go. But at least it's meaningful because you can learn from the neighboring country regarding what they do in Japan for the disabled elderly. That wraps up my presentation. Thank you.
Please give Professor a big round of applause. We have a little Q&A session, so please hold on just for a second. So, among the use cases of Japan, there are some overlappings.
This long-term care used to have different names. In Japan, they have different names from Korea. However, age over 65, I guess they didn't receive any benefits, but right now it has revised because the system guarantees any benefits over 65 years old. That new long-term service in a high price, when you reach the age of 65, I got to learn that it can help ease the burden in cost. And he also introduced the concept of a multi-type services. I guess it's much convenient after simplifying. At this international symposium and seminar at the Jeju Forum, we have a great opportunity to learn some advanced system from our neighboring countries and from advanced countries, and that way we can help disabled elderly in our community. And as you can see in the booklet, Professor provided a great number of the information. It's not saying that Japan is doing better than Korea. They do something different. And if we are able to pull out the benefits from the red tape, it would be great. And I just wish we had more time. Let's move on to the next presenter. I would like to introduce presenters first.
Our second presenter is Professor Kim Jongmi at Sungsil University. She did her master's degrees at Ewha Women's University and did her doctor's degree at the University of Kansas, USA. She's currently working at Sungsil University and she has published more than 40 papers, not only in Korea but also international journals. And she's also in charge of more than 20 projects. She's also active both internally and externally. Please give Professor a big round of applause. Next, our panelists discussions. Our first panelist is Secretary General Kim Dongbong of Korea Differently Abled Federations. He did his master's degree at Hansin University, doctor's degree at Seongkyunkwan University. He has been active in the Federation for more than 20 years to improve the rights and interests of people with disabilities. Prior to that, he served as editor-in-chief for a newspaper for the disabled for about 10 years. And he has contributed greatly to the social issuing of all these disability issues. Our second panelist from Jeju Self-Governing Provincial Council, Councilmember Hyun Ji-hong. He was at the Blue House during the Moon Jae-in administration, and he served as an administrator. And Actually, he was somewhat in charge of the second naval base in Jeju. Now he's working on a member of the Health, Welfare and Safety Committee of the 12th Jeju Special Self-Governing Province Assembly. Please give him a big hand. Our third panelist, Professor Nam Jin-yeol at Jeju National University. Actually, he has 2 doctor's degrees from Jungang University. Also, he has served as a member of Jeju Province Social Security Committee and also the president of the Korean Society for Community Welfare. He's now a professor at Jeju National University, studies silver care, and he has written and researched a number of books. Please give him a big round of applause. Now, let me pass the microphone to our second panelists.
In Korea, it's very important to set the rule and guideline for the disabled elderly. And I'm sure you are well aware of the status of Jeju. It's about 55% of aging happening among the disabled elderly. So Professor Kim Jongmi will deliver some information to you through her presentation. Hi, as introduced, my name is Kim Jongmi from Sungsil University, the Department of Social Welfare. Today I would like to talk about the status of Korean disabled in the elderly group. And I also want to touch upon some pending issues and the countermeasures regarding those issues. First, this is the aging trend of the people with the special needs. Between 2011 and 2021, I have this comparison. Among the entire population, 55 years old and older was 59%, but now it's 72%. In Jeju, compared to the registered people in 2011, there was a 14% increase. And among them, in 2011, there were 16,000 people over 55 years old, but now it's about 25,000, and the increase rate was about 52%. If you look at the aging trend of the people with the developmental disabilities, between 2011 and 2021, among all the age group, there was an increase, especially over 60 years old. The increase rate is 139%. Now I want to talk about the concept of a disabled elderly. Korea's Welfare of Senior Citizens Act defines the elderly who are 65 years or older. According to the nation's Act on Prohibition of Age Discrimination, the elderly is defined by the age 55 or older. But now here's our question. We should unify this age. And it requires to lower the age scope by considering the health gap and the quick loss of social rules between people with special needs and others without. So, especially for the developmental disability, they go through changes in the supporting system due to the aging and/or death of their parents. Here we have to be careful of one thing. There is no consensus among academia. This is a different perspective. So there is no one who can make a final decision of how we defined the disabled elderly. So according to the research to compare group with the 20-plus years of disability or less than 20-plus years, as well as different times when they develop their disabilities, they have very different trend. That is why it is extremely difficult to analyze the coalition. At the moment, we have some changes as these people with the special needs gets aged. If you look at the changes in health income and single person household, among all people with a disability, there's only 21% people believe that their health condition is okay, but population of the disability responded 19.2% in the age 50s. So you can tell they're very negative. Second, the rate of people who couldn't get medical services based on the aging of a people with the special needs. If you look at people with the 50s, 33.9% of the population couldn't go to the hospital. Regarding household income, there is a big gap. But here I only talk about population of the people with disabilities. There's a big change between the age 60s and the 70s. This shows the decreased trend of the income about little less than $2,000. Here's an interesting trend of the public transport income and property income and private transferred income. This is due to some government support. But because salary income is drastically decreased, it's really hard to fill up that gap. Also, if you look at the changes in single-person household, there are about 29.5% of male living alone in their 70s, but their counterparts of female, the rate is about 66.1%. There are a lot of research on the single-person household, and you can see the trend is growing. Then how do they use the local community services? Among the entire people with a disability in the community, they use some facility services, and as they get older, the number of frequency of them using the services drastically drops. It is mainly because they do not have a proper facilities to go, so they have no places to go. This is the paradox of an irony of welfare facilities. And we have some vocational and rehabilitation facilities, welfare center for the disabled, daycare protection, exercise facilities. Among all these types of facilities, there is a decreased trend of using local community services. How about chronic disease rate? Chronic disease rate surges from the 60s, which is 24.8%, and it becomes 46.7% in their 70s. And hypertension, diabetes, chronic pain, and depression and cancer are gradually increasing, as you can imagine. Recent studies show that developmental disability is one of the major causes. In particular, Down syndrome people, compared to other disabilities, have a higher potential of potential Alzheimer as they get older. Compared to non-disabled elderly, there are 3 times more disabled people who are diagnosed as Alzheimer's. Compared to their counterparts without disability, usually on average, their situation is 5 times worse, and this is based on the statistics. Now I would like to wrap up my presentation based on my qualitative research. So far, we had a less social interest of the aging of disabled elderly. Because, like I mentioned, there are different types of disabled people, maybe from birth or they develop their disability. So people just do not imagine disabilities have different types. So people just regular general public believe that once people have some disability, that's the end of their life. But also a lot of research focused on physical changes and the physical conditions of the people with a disability. And that means that less people are interested in the health conditions of the people with a disability. But recently, fortunately, we are seeing more of the research is because we are witnessing interesting trend that means that the disabled people tend to have less aging and have a healthier life. So more studies started to focus on those people and the trend. In terms of physical disabilities, for example, as the first disability gets deepened, the second disability occurs. It happens due to not only biological and genetic factors, but social, economic, culture, and psychological ones. Due to the second disabilities and aging, there is additional cost required, which is not enough to have it as alternative income of the elderly. The elderly with the disabilities regard their disability as a part of their lives from birth, which is not a significant issue for them. However, aging develops more physical dependency among the elderly with the disabilities. Due to such dependency, they become less confident. And we have had a different awareness among the society. Still, we have a negative awareness of people with disabilities. So despite due to this negative awareness in the community, these elderly experience the unkind services. Due to discrimination and aging, the elderly with the disabilities are not able to enter the labor market, have to retire early compared to the general elderly. Without disability and experience worsen poverty. This is based on my qualitative research, including the interview with the people with the physical disabilities. And now my next qualitative research talked about developmental disability. There are a lot of damage on teeth among these people with a disability. However, they sometimes hesitate to talk about their health condition. And it's usually found by people around them. And usually that's too late. And as they get older, their mothers or absolute supporters sometimes pass away, and there has been some care issues. So regarding aging for developmental disabilities, it has become a very important issue. Then, what kind of support can we think of for the elderly with a disability? I can think of 4 things. First, starting to link between the support system for activities for the people with the special needs, for people with age 55 or older. But after 55 and older, we have to connect them to different types of welfare services. We only just started this linkage between the 2 welfare systems, so we have to keep monitoring. Second, in 2020, bylaw to support the elderly with disability has established. especially in Gyeonggi province. And if you see the definition in Article 2, persons with a disability means the elderly with a disability means any disabled people who live in Gyeonggi province are 65 years or older. That means the government, especially local governments, has established their bylaw and regulations. However, it's more like declarative and it is not really practical. And another issue is that we need some implementing and working body. Third, one of the services provided to the disabled elderly is a daycare protection. Only in Seoul we have a few spots to provide some daycare protection programs, but it is not enough. Sorry, maybe you can help me with the slide to go up, scroll up. If not, I'll just tell you. Fourth, we can utilize some audio-visual centers. This is equivalent to the community senior centers. I kept talking about some status of the disabled elderly, and I brought up some issues of services, welfare services for the disabled people. But there are only a couple of them, and there are some laws regulating, but all these type of programs, maybe there are only 4 or 5 and they're more like a pilot program. Then what are some imminent issues regarding the aging of people with disabilities? First, segmented policies regarding disabilities. Discontinuity of services occur due to segregated long-term care policies. So when people become the age 65, they are included in a different system. In 2021, we started to provide the long-term care insurance system, but it is not enough. For example, I used 200 hours of the caregiver, but then I am now included in the elderly services. But then elderly services only provide a service in half hours, like 100 hours. Then the rest of 100 hours should be supported, and that is what I mean by supplementary measures. And that's something that we should think of later on. Second, one of the issues of aging of people with disabilities. Usually, there are 60 to 15% of the basic benefits as a support system for activities of the people with the special needs. So let's say I'm over 65, I'm using the disability service, and I'm also using the activity services for the elderly. But that means that you have to pay double for different types of services. And the thing is, long-term care insurance system is quite different from other disability-related services, because these two have a different objective and different philosophy. So if you use 2 different type of services, that can have a conflict. And some local governments provide additional benefits for the support system for activities of the people with special needs, but they may decrease or eliminate the volume of the benefits when the disabled switch to the long-term care service for the elderly. Because there's a different role between the supporter and assistant for your activities as a senior or caregiver for the disabled people. Next, our community lack local community services. there's a discontinuity here too. That means that the services for people with special needs are extremely limited and it is hard to link. Third, lack of various housing service models. We do not have great models. Fourth, there are some three imminent issues. Then what kind of aging is successful by the definition of the people with the developmental disabilities? Aging in place was the term you saw in the video. That means that you stay in the familiar environment while maintaining safety, comfort, belongings to the community. And reliable and sustainable housing is important. Sometimes you're put in a facility, but you will be moved from place to place. And you do want to have a place where you can hang out with your family while maintaining your great conditions of health, and that's what developmental disabled people want. Last but not least, supporting measures. To link measures to support activities and long-term care insurance systems for the elderly, we need to secure the service flexibilities. And active aging should be the basic philosophy. And for age 50 or older, we need to develop and provide the local community services. And also, we need to provide the various housing services with the local community. And we need to improve the usage of and the access to the medical services. Some kind of smaller scale programs could be better, or programs for leisure and cultural activities for them. Last but not least, we need to link between the disability policies and policies on the elderly. That wraps up my presentation. Thank you.
수고하셨습니다. 박수.
Thank you very much. Please give our professor a big round of applause. So you mentioned a lot of issues here.
So you touched upon the status of the disabled elderly with a great amount of statistics, including developmental disabilities. And you also touched upon the health issues of the elderly. Chronic disease became also an issue. And you just mentioned that 66.1% of a female elderly lived alone. It's a very high rate. So in Jeju, we had established the bylaw and the ordinance of the local government for this disabled elderly. And I heard that we need some supporting. So whether these disabled elderly have an option to choose whether the service for the elderly or service for the disabled, they should be able to choose by themselves. However, they sometimes want to get supported by their activities, but they have some restrictions and limitations because of the discontinuity of the programs between the programs for the elderly and programs for the elderly. Aging, please, was the catchphrase. If you may watch that video before our session. And that means that local governments can support these elderly, can stay where they used to live almost for the rest of their lives. And that could be one great program. And I also want to add that once you become an elderly, there are more chances of having disabilities. Must be some concerns. In a bigger framework, private and public partnership should come up with some measures and have a further discussions. Doesn't matter if it's the disabled elderly, instead of having two different programs for the elderly and for the disabled, you have to think of the measures to combine these programs or link these programs. And now I want to turn the microphone to the next speaker and panelist.
사무총장님께서
First, our first discussant, Secretary General Kim Dongbong, will give his comments. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. So Korea is going into an aging country or an aged country. We're all aware of that. How much average age do you think Koreans have? It's 43.9 years old. So that is quite aging. So what is the average age of people with disabilities? 62.8. So it takes about 2.4 years left for them to become elderly. And we have also heard from the presentation is from Ministry of Welfare from late 2021. So elderly more than 65 years old is more than 50%, 51.3% it is. So we have about 9.01 million people categorized at elderly. It's about 17.5% of the total population. And again, among them, 51.3% are people with disabilities. So again, Professor Kim has mentioned Japan has about 2.7-fold. In Korea, I believe it's getting more faster than Japan. So the demographic change is very rapid. But still, the policy transition does not catch up.
정책과 비
Compared to other conventional policies, we have social participation, non-discrimination, access rights, mobility rights, activity supports. Those were the main points. That's related to social activities of the disabled. But however, the policy shifts considering the elderly and disabled have been very slow. And so recently our society's attention was abolition of the disability rating system and disinstitutionalization and comprehensive measures. Of course, these have to be our main points, but despite the rapid aging of the population, we have to have policy changes. But there's relatively little attention that has been paid. So here, it is very meaningful to think about governments for the elderly at the forum. So when we think about the statistics, we think about the type of disability. So in many parts of the statistics, we only talk about these types. So, however, we have to look upon the age difference, age groups. So I actually wanted to look for these data, but I couldn't have any data that classifies the people with disabilities by age groups. Again, we were too much focusing on disability types. And again, the disability ratings. So now we're talking about tailored services for the disabled, but actually there's nothing really going on. The reason is because we had this classification for gradings and not by ages. So we keep thinking about these aging population, the aging policies, and we've been working with the Korea Differently Abled Federation, and we were thinking about how we can change things. So we came up with two factors. So that is income security and medical service support. That applies also for the elderly, not even the disabled. And when we do statistics, we do survey, the income security and medical service support has the most demand. And again, it is related to elderly policies. Again, so thinking about how Korea is doing in this field, well, we'll have to see. We had this thing called pension, and the pension cannot cover every income security we need. We had some hard times with with only pensions, and for medical service support policy, we've been working on for about 10 years, but still, there's no much concrete things going on. And again, we have a long way to go. And income security, only the grade 2 people with disability gets the support. And when we talk about people with severe disabilities, that covers grade 1 and 2. But if severe means 1, 2, and 3, then we will be able to give this pension for people with severe disabilities. And we have this act on the guarantee of the right to health for persons with disability. It's been already 4 years. We did 3 types of pilot policies, and the stage 3 was quite did well, but only 590 people were able to get that. So that's about 0.5% of the total people with disabilities. The number of users over the age of 60 is about 1,100. That's only 44% of the users. So yes, that is because of the lack of will of the government, and that's not much profit generated. So as we're now at the stage 3 pilot project, only 590 primary care physicians were registered, but only 72 physicians actually participated. That's only 12.2%. Lastly, I would to comment on the people with development disabilities. So we are now talking on the early pension receipt. So when we think about the average life expectancy, people with hearing loss will live in average 84.1 years. People with visual loss, 79 years. But people with autistic disorders, only 28.3 years. The average age when they die is 23.3 years. They can even reach the age when they start getting the pension. So again, we want to have some flexible age limit. Some parents say it should be 35 years old or 40. So still, the average life expectancy is going up. So there might be some upward adjustment, but still, this is something that we have. We have to change the age when they get the pension. So that was my comments. Thank you very much. So we have to finish until 2:55. So I won't do any comment. So now I will pass the microphone to Council Member Hyun Ji-hong. Please give him a big round of applause.
하시는 데는 잘 안 보이.
Actually, there's a timer ticking, and the time's chasing up. I'm no professional, frankly speaking, but I believe you have me here for my perspective, opinions from my perspective. But actually, I've heard 3 presentations, and actually I realized that we think about the same. my views are not that different. So while preparing for this, I had these questions unsolved. I talked with many professionals, but still, the terminology elderly with disability. So when we talk about the elderly, we talk about the age, it's about the number. So number can define, but they take away the flexibility in our policies because the numbers are fixed. So we have to think about the determination first. Who are actually elderly with disabilities? So by law, we talk about the classification and the types of disability, but they don't talk about the age of the elderly. So I've heard this from a previous presentation. We have acts in Jeju province to support the elderly with disabilities. We have ordinances, but everywhere they always define people with disabilities who are 65 years or older. But still, is it enough to just classify elderly with disabilities someone just older than 65 years old? So again, there's an early aging, and then again, that is something that we have to consider. So normally the aging of people with disabilities is very fast, much faster than people with no disabilities. And actually there's a difference type by type, and that difference is very high. And again, we have to have some physical things going on. We have to figure out how different is that. So for people with development disabilities, if they get 40 years, then they are quite older than other as well. So if a person with developmental disability is 55 years old, is that person an elderly with disabilities? Legally, no. But these people are excluded from all policies for the elderly with disabilities. So the experience should be detached from the numbers. So like I mentioned, so elderly with disabilities must be someone with senile disorders as well. So it's necessary to consider separately the case of aging and the case of disability. And we have to think about whether these people with disabilities are not beneficiary of the pension they need. So, for example, if I have to have a caregiver all the time, then my caregivers, my parents, will get older with me. And when I was young, for example, my parents have a harder time giving me cares. So this early aging and the aging of my parents is going together. So maybe I want to go into the facility as soon as possible. So in the Ministry of Health Health Project Guide, they have rules for entry and exit, but there's no age limit for discharge, because generally people over 60 are classified as dementia bearers and they're transferred to senior care facilities. So, but in reality, it's not easy for them to be transferred to nursing elderly facilities. And I won't be allowed there because I am younger than 65. So that is only an example, but we will see things like that happen. Another example, let's say there is good policy and there are good shelters for people elderly people with disabilities. Say there is a 60-year-old person with disabilities, but that person will not be allowed. Actually, that person will go look for facilities for the elderly, but that person will be rejected because of the age, because that person is younger than 65 years old. So the definition is very vague. So, for example, if an elderly with disability is over 65, maybe if they go to the government body, they can go to the elderly facilities or a facility for people with disability, but they will not be welcome from anywhere. So please think about that. So the definition, we have to clarify the definition, and if we have a department for that, then we won't have any problems in the future. So again, we have to have a clear definition for the elderly with disability, and we have to consider the aging pace. Again, we're talking about 65 years old. Again, these are the numbers. And these are barriers for fast health for them. And again, this has been quite vague. So this is something I want to tell. So let's get rid of the numbers. We can have a new terminologies. We can say people with disabilities that are aging. Then we can have some flexible policies for them. So we can use the word aging disabilities, and we can do more researches, and then we can have more flexibilities in the future. So again, this aging disabilities or people with disabilities that is aging might be a key for better policies in the future. So there was a demonstration last May 27th. Actually, there was a phrase that they dream of living one more day than their child with disabilities. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
아쉽지
So I will spare my comment. Maybe I can tell you at the council. Our last discussions.
교수님께서 발언 시간을 드리겠습니다.
Professor Nam Jin-yeol, I will give you 8 minutes. Let's give him a big round of applause. I'm sure I can finish within 8 minutes. Usually the last panel discussant can skip a lot of part that is repeated by the previous speakers. I would like to talk about 3 points. First, as mentioned, the session is called Going Beyond the Border of the Ability and Disability. And we desperately need support for the disabled elderly. But the governance is not efficient or sufficient, and that's why we are here to establish the basic countermeasures. So we've been talking about some redefinition of the age and the social consensus. Also, at the central government level, what kind of measures provided? How about local governments? How about local community to support the disabled elderly? That's what I would like to focus today. Professor Kim Jae-geun, Professor Kim Jongmi, thank you very much for your presentation. And after that, I realized that general public will have a better life once their counterparts with the disabilities in the community live well, but it's also difficult to realize. Professor Kim Jae-geun talked about the status of a Japanese elderly with the disabilities. 71% faster the aging is happening among the elderly in Japan, and there is a 2.7 more. But if you compare mental disability people's fatal rate, it's much less compared to people with a physical disability. So Professor Kim Jae-geun touched upon the Japanese over age 65. However, Professor Kim Jongmi talked about and focused on 55 years old. Unfortunately, we have to pay attention to everyone with the disabilities. However, in 2011, there was 139% of an increase, and that's almost 2.39-fold. And if you look at this trend of increase of the aging trend among the disabled elderly, I want to suggest 3 points. This is a very complex term. If you call a disabled elderly, however, if you look into the regulations and laws, it is about long-term care, and according to the Welfare Act of People with a Disability, we have some legal ground. Disabled people's disability could deteriorate aging, but it depends on the different classification. So if you think of the characteristic of the two groups, we also have something in common. So it's important to distinguish the common areas and some differences. And the central government has a role to redefine all these terms. Also, Hyun Ji-young mentioned, as of July 2020, if I visited the Government and Legislation Institute, among 21 metropolitan cities and provinces, there have some established rules. However, it is surprising that when local government has such laws and regulations, but the central government doesn't have any concrete and detailed laws and regulations. So depending on types of disabilities, we need to gain some social consensus to redefine the definition. Second, like I said, the central government needs more interest and support policies. Among the OECD countries, we have a faster rate of the aging in Korea. However, It is not efficient provided by central government. And metropolitan government and local government do have legislations and laws and regulations, but that's only recent. And that's something that the central government should consider. Yes, it is important to have the central government level of support in order to enhance the quality of life for the disabled elderly. So I emphasize the central government's role to be important. However,
지방정부 지역사회의 역할과 지역사회
it is important to have a social agreement between the local governments and the local community. According to Kim Jongmi, Professor Kim Jongmi, she mentioned about lack of local community services. I believe so. I agree 100%. And people over 40 years old have a limited services. For example, as Professor Kim mentioned, and whether we have to integrate the services for the elderly and services for the disabled, I believe we need some social consensus. However, services for disabled elderly should benefit the disabled elderly. In order to establish the governance, we need to include a lot of stakeholders to establish the great system. It could be private or public sectors. Doesn't matter who leads the initiative. However, important part is that we should create a decent system. Last but not least, welfare for people with a disability is the welfare for everyone, and the solution of the welfare for the disabled elderly. And that wraps up my comments. Thank you. That was the last panelist. Im Tae-woong, please don't leave. I know you're busy, but we have discussion time. He came from the Jeju provincial government. Maybe I will give you an opportunity to make some comments.
보세요.
Nice to meet you all. I never prepared for any comments, but as a director of welfare in Jeju provincial government, at the end of the day, there are lots of issues regarding welfare for people with disabilities. For the last 30, 40 years, frequency of the service usage or quality of life have drastically changed. However, we still have the systems and regulations from 30, 40 years ago, and that is outdated. What it means is that usually the policies and regulations is based on the budget 30 and 40 years ago. And it is not realistic to apply these days. Maybe in the future, I do not think there will be drastic changes. Meaning that if we want to pull out practical actions, we need a decent system. For example, 30, 40 years ago, established 30, 40 years ago, anything was based on the prediction and assumption. And we didn't have a lot of decent data to establish such systems regarding the disabled elderly. But now we have a more disabled elderly. So at the end of the day, to establish a great governance, it is something that we have to create, which can be the futuristic with all the stakeholders. That wraps up my comments. Thank you. We have 56 seconds left. It's really awkward to take one question. Anybody wants to have the last question? Yes, sure, go ahead. So you mentioned about services to support programs of activities for the people with the disabilities. They already have obstacles. That means that disability and aging. However, the current rule try to apply everything for people with age 50, 65 or older. There are some people with the severe disabilities, but then they get less and less services as they move to the services for the senior. So who provided the fund for that services? I believe that is financially supported by tax. So according to the long-term care for the elderly, I believe for developmental disability requires the services for the age 40 or over, but probably we can think of some special clause in the existing law. Maybe we can think of some ordinance or administrative decree so that we can fill up the gap when these disability move on to the programs and the benefits for the senior. Thank you very much for your comment. Let's give him a big round of applause. I just wish that we had more time. And once again, I would like to appreciate all the presenters and panelists. And if you can go to the YouTube, you can later watch this again for your reference and information. We have about 60 offline audience. And thank you very much for your presence. And that wraps up our session. Thank you very much for your time today.